now we can watch in our chat now. We'll just be able to tell everyone we're trying to hook up, find it on our devices so we can follow comments. This is Real Talk Livestream at Awaken Ministries, and it should be coming up live here momentarily. Good morning. Yep, there we are. Okay, coming up. See, now we got the echo. Live here momentarily.
Turn that volume down.
What'd you say?
Turn your volume down.
Wait. Okay, so I'm trying to figure out how to get this on a watch party. It's not showing up as an option. Let me back up. Following. Do you have it up on yours now, Ruth?
I have a picture of you, and it says it's live.
Okay.
And it has a box that says watch an app. Do you have to have that app to watch it?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I can't even get out of it now. Anybody having fun watching us try to figure it out? We'll actually talk.
Oh, now I have it.
Now
I have it now.
Okay. I think part of the problem is it was only showing up for me where it was wanted to be boosted. I don't need to boost it right now. But I can see now there are people on watching, so that's good. At least now I know that it's visible to others. Thank you, people, for showing me that. Okay, I don't know how to make it a watch party today, but good enough. I just want to be able to make sure we can see y'all making comments or asking questions as we go along here. So we'll get started. And I just want to thank everybody for coming. This is Real Talk Livestream. Is that right? I can't even see it. Found it. There we go. We've got Rebecca on, and who else? I don't know. Anyway, thank you for being with me today, Ruth. Oh, look, it did show up. It's on a delay. I have to stop watching that now. I'll be distracted. I'm going to hit the record button now that we're running, because we may want to add this to our... Hi, Beth. Good to see you. Where is it? There we go. Okay, y'all, we're going to record this so that it can also be posted on YouTube if necessary. We are recognizing, well, I'll give a couple disclaimers in a couple minutes, but let's get going here. Good morning. This is Real Talk Livestream, and I'm Lisa Jamieson with Awaken Ministries. We're a discipleship organization that is building faith and community with special needs families. And today I have with me my friend Ruth Buezis, and I don't just throw that my friend thing around. Like, I actually have known Ruth for probably over 10 years, and our daughters are good friends. And she wrote a book several years ago that I have just found. I've read a lot of books in this genre, if you will, and I have found this one to be very top of my big pile. And so I just wanted to get her on here to talk. It is not a book specifically for special needs families, but it's about an issue that special needs families find particularly challenging at times: connectedness in our marriage and just couples enjoying life and each other together. So I just wanted to be able to try to frame it up for our families that we serve at Awaken Ministries in the context of having a family member impacted by disabilities, but bring in all your wonderful perspectives about what the Bible has to say about sex and marriage and connectedness, and Oh, there's just so much. And in fact, as we've been preparing, we've just realized this really needs to be a two-parter. So Ruth has agreed to come back in October. So on October 15th at noon, we're going to be right back here digging a little bit deeper. For today, our goals are really just this. Let me read through them so you know where we're hoping to go today. We first of all really just want to bring marriage to the front burner for couples who are parenting a child with special needs. We want to proactively make space for couples to connect with each other. And we want to reassure couples that raising children with special needs have hope for a satisfying and rich marriage. We're going to take a look a little bit later today about what the statistics have to say about marriages impacted by disability. There's a lot of misunderstanding and misquoting going on with that, so we want to take an honest look at it. We're also going to try to offer some practical ideas about how to thrive despite the obstacles that we face as special needs families. We are a little bit concerned that some of our conversation may end up getting blocked by Facebook, so I'll explain that in a moment. But I'm also not that worried about it because we're just kind of talking conceptually in some ways here. We're not ever in part 1 or 2 really going to get into any mechanics or technique or things like that. We're talking just a lot about connectedness and lust and the issues that challenge our families. So we just want to cover these families in prayer too. So with that, let me just say a quick word of prayer. Heavenly Father, this is a hard subject for a lot of reasons to talk about, but it's also a huge opportunity and a great joy for me to talk about it with Ruth and the families who are watching now and in the future as we archive this. So I pray, God, that you would cover it all with your love, with your power and your grace and your insight and anything else that you know these families need today and in the future. God, we are facing challenges, all of us, different ones, and many of us are experiencing a deeper squeeze even than normal because of this pandemic kind of stay home, stay close to home sort of lifestyle we're all living. So I pray, God, that you would just intervene in the midst of this day, these circumstances, and all of the circumstances of our lives to just multiply our joy in you and each other. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Ruth, would you tell us a little bit about your background and what inspired you to write the book Awaken Love?
Sure. About 8 years ago, I experienced transformation in my life. Just a greater understanding of the intimacy that God wanted me to have with him, but also with my husband. And a big part of that actually included working on physical intimacy. I think it's something that we can take for granted, or we can think that it's for our husband, or we can just start depending on our physical drives to kind of rule us. And so as I began exploring what God really wanted for us in this realm of our life, it totally rocked my world. It changed my life, and it changed my relationship with my husband. And we've been really fortunate to have a pretty easy, good marriage. We're both kind of rational, I don't know, mild people, not too crazy. A couple of engineers that just kind of got along and worked well together. But this has really taken our level of intimacy to a new level. And as we worked on physical intimacy, it changed all areas of our intimacy. Because working in physical intimacy isn't easy, it's hard work. And so as you dive into that work, it transforms you in other ways. And so about 8 years ago, I just felt like God was calling me to share what I'd learned. And I started by inviting about 8 friends out on my porch to teach them about what I'd learned. I wrote a 6-week curriculum and began sharing it with them. And by week 3, they were lingering at the door to say, you can't imagine how my marriage has changed. And from then it has spread by word of mouth. And I think I've probably taught over 800 women personally, and then probably another couple thousand on videos. And then a couple years ago decided I need to write a book, because I was getting so far removed from God transforming me, I thought, I don't want to remember what God did. And I want to write this down. I want to document it. I want this to be this remembrance, this testimony of how good God is.
Hmm.
And so I spent a year writing, and it was, I'm not an author. It was a hard process. And yet it was just so good to remember and to celebrate and to be able to share that with other people too. You know, just another way to get the word out about how important physical intimacy is in creating intimacy in a marriage. And that, you know, we buy into these lies that marriage is just going to get boring, and we settle for less than what God has for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's an importance to knowing that things don't just come naturally. We have to be intentional, and we have to work on it.
Well, I have to commend you for being so brave, and for being brave to be a writer too. You know, I honestly, I'm not always real encouraging to writer wannabes, because I know it takes a lot, and you actually have to have a great story or something to talk about, and you have to be able to tell it well. And not everybody's equipped for both of those things. I'm certainly challenged myself. But I have to say, this is a beautiful book with great insight, well explained. And you hoped that it would go far, I think, and just that God would use it. Well, I can tell you, I was in a church a couple years ago at Inclusion Fusion Live, which is a special needs conference for parents and disability ministry leaders in Ohio, and saw an advertisement in the women's ministry area for a class called Awaken Love. And I read the description, and while it didn't have your name, I thought, oh my goodness, are they doing Ruth's class here in Ohio? Because I live in Minnesota. Ruth lives in Minnesota, and I'm excited to think that her stuff has reached this far. And I texted you and I said, is this yours? And sure enough, it was. And I have since connected with the special needs mom there who facilitates that class. And it's just really fun to see your ministry growing and influencing others. It's just a wonderful story of God's redemption and his heart to see us grow in love in our marriages. So I feel privileged to share it with our friends today.
Yeah.
Let me give a couple disclaimers again, like I mentioned, before we go much further, because this is a little scary. In fact, this morning I had cut up some of the last of our fresh peaches for Larry, my husband, and he came up from his basement office to get his and gave me a nice kiss. And I said, "Don't be afraid, honey." And he said, "I'm always afraid." And we both laughed, but he knows my heart, and his heart too is to just be honest about our stories and vulnerable to the extent that it may help others. So it's a little scary, but to whatever extent God asks me to reveal certain things in my experiences and you and yours and others and theirs, I just hope that we encourage each other and point each other to Jesus. That being said, it's probably obvious by now, Ruth is not a special needs parent. So part of what I'm here hoping to do is to help give some context to special needs families. Because of course, my daughter Carly is 22 and has Angelman syndrome and lives at home with us. So we're well acquainted with some of those kind of challenges, just the lack of privacy, the lack of spontaneity and flexibility. We are not your typical empty nesters by a long shot. We're much more like having a household full of little toddlers, or even maybe a little older, in the sense that they're older people around are old enough to hear and to be aware of what might be happening and all of that. So there's just a lot of potential obstacles for intimacy, even conversation, which can be a little like foreplay at times, frankly, is hard to have in the manner, as you're passing in the kitchen making lunch these days. Those kinds of encounters are different when you have a young adult and other caregivers around and so forth. So I think people watching can understand that. Anyway, so we're going to be trying to be a little selective about our vocabulary today so that we don't get blocked by Facebook, and we may have young ears listening in even inadvertently. So I just warn you, this is going to be a frank, candid conversation as much as we can make it that. But we're also trying to be a little bit careful. And as I mentioned, we're not going to be talking about like specific details and mechanics. This is just not the place. And we don't need to, because there's a lot of other stuff we'll be able to talk about that's profoundly helpful and has the potential to transform our marriages. The book does go into some of those things. So I will say, if you want more specifics, get the book. But we aren't going to specifically talk about that, a lot of that here. And also, I just wanted to say, as a pastoral counselor myself, licensed and also certified in temperament therapy, this is not a place for people to get counseling. We're going to encourage people at any point here to post your questions, ideas, thoughts. But I also just encourage couples, especially couples impacted by disability, get yourselves support, get help, get counseling, get whatever you need. This is not a kind of relationship to try to maintain through adversity by yourself. Some type of community around you is more important than ever. We all need it. Why, tell me, why do you think we need to talk about intimacy in marriage? Why is this important for any marriage?
Well, I think particularly with physical intimacy, there's so much misinformation, and the world is screaming lies to us about it, as far as it's just important for men, or it's just a way that men use women, or men they just lust and they want to use you, or women not understanding how their bodies work and defining things by what works for men. Or even misinformation is coming from the church, right? Mm-hmm. That this is your duty to do this. Well, God's word clearly portrays it as a mutual way to love each other, not as a duty that you have to do. And the more you force somebody to do something, the more we usually resist. Mm-hmm. And so it's misinformation from the world, from the church, but we're up against things like, lust on video everywhere, and that getting into families and those challenges.
Can I just interject for a moment too and say, when you say force somebody to do something, you're not even necessarily talking about like an abusive, overtly kind of force. No. We're talking about just the pressures that we sometimes put on each other, unfairly, but sometimes understandably. We're under a lot of stress too in our families.
Right. When it becomes something on your to-do list, your very long to-do list, right? Then it becomes something that you don't look forward to, and you don't think that, well, this is something that's good for me, that's going to be restorative, that it's going to re-energize me. We start to believe that it's going to be something that sucks the last ounce of energy out of us. And even though I don't have special needs kids, I had 4 kids within 6 years. And I remember those years of just feeling like just one more thing, like I don't have anything left to give. And yet God's intent was that my husband would give back to me, that the two of us coming together as one would restore me.
Yeah.
And that it should be something that I look forward to, not something that I dread because it's another to-do list.
Yeah. When my girls were little, I remember, I don't know how I learned this, but I remember discovering that it was first of all, very hard for me to take a nap. I just couldn't make myself take a nap, even if I logistically could find the time. When they tell that mother of a newborn, you have to nap when the baby naps, when none of us do it. And we know we should, but we don't, and so forth. Well, I began to realize that part of what kept me from it what, like I'd say, oh, I'm afraid if I lay down, I'll never get up, but really at the core of it was that I was feeling that was somehow self-indulgent, and I really felt this weight of responsibility to keep ahead of everything, of which many of those things actually could have fallen down a list of priorities. But it really felt on some level self-indulgent, and I didn't feel worthy or willing to pamper myself that way.
Right.
But actually, when I started to realize that my taking a nap was as important for my husband and my marriage as it was for just me personally, I felt a lot more freedom to say, okay, so if a power nap in early or mid-afternoon is what helps energize me for an extra hour or so in the evening, so that I can enjoy relationship with my husband in a different way, intimacy, hopefully, because of all the benefits of that, then why not? Why not? Now that has multiplied 100-fold in my mind since becoming a special needs parent, and recognizing that now it's harder than ever to get a nap. And yet, if having somebody come into my home, even just to allow me to take a rest for a half an hour and hang out with Carly and watch a movie, if that's what they have to do because they're not trained to do anything else. And it's hard for me. It might take me 15, 20 minutes just to finally fall asleep, and then my alarm's going to go off if I set it for a 20-minute power nap. So I kind of have learned if 20 minutes is what refreshes me enough to get through what's needed for my marriage, and frankly to be a better mom too, then I could think differently about how I was going to prioritize and organize my day, and even how I set my alarm, because I kind of got to the point where I've learned that if I set my alarm for 45 minutes, then even if it takes me 15, 20 minutes to fall asleep, which usually it won't if I don't feel the pressure to fall asleep, then I get the 20. And for me, 20 is hard to wake up after just 20. It really is. But if I do, and it's scientifically proven, I feel completely more focused and energized afterwards and ready for whatever the day may call for, or the things that I may want to do.
Yeah, there is a huge importance for self-care. We do tend to be the martyrs that will give up everything for everybody else until we have nothing left to give. Mm-hmm. And maybe that part of that is our tendency to want to control everything and not say, okay, I'm going to trust that this is going to be okay. I have those same tendencies, but it's not rocket science. Like if you have nothing left, you have nothing left. Mm-hmm. And so how do we practice self-care to have something left?
Well, let's go back to talking about mindset too, because you do a great job of exploring throughout the book the different mindset stuff. And that relates here even to self-care, because if we have a mindset that says, this is just another thing on my to-do list, intimacy with my husband, rather than it's actually another type of self-care, and not just in a selfish way, but self-care for both of us. Because if it's truly the experience of intimacy with my husband, if it's truly going to provide refreshment and comfort, then isn't that what self-care is supposed to do? So, right. And it's a giving and a receiving. Sometimes it's more giving than receiving, because sometimes one of us is just needing more comfort than the other. But one of my favorite chapters in the book is about comfort and refreshment. We'll probably talk about that more later, but should we talk about it right now? I guess we could talk about it.
Sure, let's go for it. I guess when I really went looking for answers about this area, I read a bazillion different books, and there are a bazillion different opinions, and I think there's good and bad information in all books, including Christian books.
Yeah.
And so I really felt like I had to go to the source, to God's word, to figure out, okay, what does God say about sex? So let me share just a few things about this. They're just really important concepts. One is, if you read Song of Songs, husband and wife in this relationship, and explicit and passionate and fun and creative. And if you pay attention to her role versus his role, she is absolutely an equal. She initiates, she expresses herself, she asks for what she wants, she plans for them to go out and have sex out in vineyards early in the morning. She talks about her lover being part of Engedi, an oasis, a way to seek refreshment. They're equals.
Mhm.
And if you look at the roles of men and women when this book was written, there's no way that women were close to equals to men. They had few rights. And yet in the marriage bed, she was an absolute equal. And I think there's an importance to that, because we've bought into this lie that physical intimacy is just for men, and that it's important for them and that it's not important for us. And that was never, ever God's intent. And we need to have the freedom to step into this space of realizing, no, God created this for me. I'm completely different from my husband. I work different. My drive is different. How my body operates is different. What excites me is different. But I have the opportunity to show my husband some things he might never experience if I don't become an equal partner in this. And my husband can show me some things that may not come easily to me, but maybe I need to learn. Like maybe my husband helps me be, I don't know, a little more, less worried about things, and be able to be spontaneous and let go of the worries of the day and just have some fun and go and escape. And maybe we can help our husband to, I don't know, not focus so much on the destination, but the journey and discovery, and really getting to know each other and connecting. Because I don't think we just want to get to the destination, we want to connect. And so that's the first principle that I think is really important, is the mutuality that God designed for physical intimacy in marriage.
You know, special needs moms come to the bedroom at night and probably should come different times than just at night. We'll talk about that next month. We come often having been so consumed mentally and emotionally with being an advocate for our child with disabilities. That has, for so many of us, at times become so consuming that our husbands kind of give up, feeling like they're constantly competing and they can't compete anymore. And then we misinterpret their distance, or we feel guilty and let that debilitate us. So that, I think there were a number of things about this chapter that, while spoken of generally, I just applied it mentally in that sort of space in this special needs marriage I have. And let me just read a couple quotes from your book and then let you comment on them. One says this: "But God never meant for sex to suck life out of us. In fact, he intended quite the opposite. God wants to refresh us, to fill us up, and to even comfort us through intimate connection with our husbands. What if sex could help you and your husband thrive in the midst of the day-to-day battles of raising kids? What if sex could act as a refuge from the chaos or the hard things you and your husband face? What if sex could even comfort you in the midst of grief?" And families impacted by disability deal with chronic grief. We face triggers all the time for our disappointments about what life hasn't been able to be, what will be. Even the fact that we can't be spontaneous about our intimacy triggers grief. Mm-hmm. And yet then, unfortunately, we often respond to that by pulling away from each other instead of doing exactly the opposite and going to each other to give and receive comfort. And you give a life-changing, mindset-changing example in your book that comes straight from Scripture. It's in 2 Samuel 12:24. I had never thought about this, and I've shared it with many women I'm working with in counseling about how when David and Bathsheba lost a son, and in her grief, he comforted her with intimacy. It says, God created you. This is a quote from you. God also created sex for comfort sex to comfort us. When David and Bathsheba lost their child, it says in 2 Samuel 12:24, then David comforted his wife Bathsheba, and he went to her and made love to her.
Mm-hmm.
That is so beautiful.
It's a huge mindset shift to believe that God created sex to comfort a wife as well as a husband.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we've been so inundated with this lie that men just use physical intimacy to use women,
Mm-hmm.
or that it's just for men, that it's a huge mindset shift until you believe that God created intimacy for us as for our husband. How can we ever believe that it's going to be a comfort?
Yeah. Well, and you know, we
I've
do.
seen the shift in women in class, like a huge shift. One woman, she'd had a horrible day at work, and she said, in the past, I would have never ever reached for my husband. But she said, I went home and all I could think about was becoming one with my husband. It was just this huge mindset shift, and it's not something that comes naturally until you really believe God's truth about this, and until you really discard all of those lies that the world has been flooding us with. We won't get this.
Yeah. Yeah, I really I found that very interesting in your book when I was rereading it this summer on the deck one weekend afternoon, and I chatted to Larry. I said, you know, is this really true? Like, she's suggesting that men want emotional connectedness to their wives just as much as the women do. Like, that's not what the world tells us about men, and that's not what we generally believe. That they want emotional and spiritual kind of deep connectedness to us. And he said, oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess I wouldn't describe it necessarily in those same words, but that's ultimately what I want. And I found that fairly interesting because I guess on some level, I'm blessed to have a marriage that's come to a point where I know that's true. But I wrestled for years feeling like we both were trying to get something different out of that experience.
Yeah, I have a couple of comments about that. One, my husband and I teach men's classes a couple times a year, and we'll have 20 guys that come, and it's super fun. And I always ask them, what do you wish the wives understood about you? And they always say, like, when I want physical intimacy with my wife, I just want to be connected to her. I just want to reconnect with her. And then I also think back to, one of the other reasons God created sex is to make two into one, right? It's all related to this concept. And I think back to times when my husband and I were in disagreement. And for whatever reason, we were not going to work it out that night. And eventually it's like, okay, we're just going to go to bed. We're going to readdress this tomorrow. And we go to bed. And then pretty soon he's cozying up for me and reaching for me to try to have physical intimacy. I'm thinking, like, you gotta be kidding. There is no way. How can that even be on your mind now? This is the worst possible moment. Mm-hmm. And I used to get so angry about it. And now I look back at that and I think, you know what? Is it possible that my husband didn't want to just use me in that moment? Is it possible that he understood the power of this gift that God gave us to reconnect the two of us when we couldn't do it on our own, and that God was going to somehow help reconnect us through physical intimacy, that it was a gift, not just a way to use each other. And I have such a new, I don't know, I think I have more trust in my husband. I have more trust in God that, you know what, even if my heart isn't it, God, I'm going to trust that you're going to make something good out of this. And I trust that my husband isn't going to try to use me. Now, there are men that use their wives. Mm-hmm. And I want to never tell a wife, you need to just do this for him. Because that's not true. There are husbands that use wives. My husband is not one of those men. He would do anything in the world for me. He would not try to hurt me. And he would not try to use me. And so in those moments when he's reaching for me, I can believe that he is the same man in that moment as he is the rest of the time.
Yeah.
And then
And
all
I
he
do
wants to do is
think
love
that,
me.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's true. And those people need to work on that. And they need usually some help to work on that. But there's also a number of men who look like or feel to their wives like they are in that category. And they just are being misunderstood. And I
I
think,
think a lot of times they just don't have words. They
yeah,
don't know how to say it. They know that this magical thing happens when they become one with their wife. All of a sudden they feel reconnected with her. They feel close to her. They feel loved. And that's what they want. They just want to feel reconnected and loved.
yeah.
And they
Larry and I have
can't put that
figured
into
out,
words.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Larry and I have kind of figured out over the years sort of a rhythm for us in terms of timing relatively how frequently we need to connect intimately in order to stay emotionally and spiritually healthy and strong. It's kind of like part of the self-care, not all of it, but part of the self-care even for our marriage is intimacy.
Sure.
And so we've kind of figured out what the pacing needs to be, and we have learned we have to schedule it.
Yeah.
Not only to make sure that the pace happens, but because unfortunately we can't very rarely can we be spontaneous. So we have to find ways to actually schedule it like we would a date.
Right.
Which that's a whole nother conversation and how hard that was to do, even like physically making our bodies respond on a schedule. But it's possible, let me tell you. Where was I trying to go with that? Thinking about this idea of comfort, though, and the pacing. We had an experience recently of conflict, and I actually could feel the tension sort of growing. Not so much between us, but it was translating into distance, but I could just sense both of us had work related and Carly related tensions and stuff growing, and various things, including some vacation away and stuff, had prohibited our usual rhythm, shall we say. And so I knew we came home from Labor Day weekend, last weekend away up at my folks, and it had been quite some time since we'd been physically intimate. And I knew that we really needed to connect that night. And I'd actually been praying all weekend, like when we get home on Monday night, we have to figure out how to make that happen. And yet Carly's bedtime routine is such a difficulty. And so many families experience this. Some even have adults still co-sleeping in their bedrooms, or one spouse sleeps in the child's bedroom. We all are dealing with some crazy circumstances. And so anyway, I knew that we needed this, like a vaccine almost in our marriage, to get reconnected. And of course, warfare, I knew it. Not only was Carly not going to sleep, and it was now after midnight, and we both had to work in the morning, but something triggered in the stress of trying to deal, because Carly wasn't just not going to sleep. There were some circumstances and behaviors escalating with her. And we were already both high stress and both anxious, even just to get to bed, even if we had to give up on the other part. And we both were getting angry, and something triggered, and we ended up in a horrible argument. One of the worst, most emotionally charged arguments we've had in a while. Not saying a lot, because our marriage is, especially because of me, I'll own the intensity part of our marriage, is so different than yours, in the sense that I would never use the word relaxed or laid back or anything to describe me. All that to say, we were as far apart as could be. And that, like you said, the last thing then on our minds is the very thing that just hours before we were knowing could be a place of comfort and restoration and refreshment. And this is the kind of scenario in general that our families with disability are facing all the time. Not only just the logistical interruptions and distractions, but the emotional stress levels, so that it doesn't take much to put us over an edge a lot of times. And so suddenly, the very thing that can be one of the greatest self-care steps for our marriage becomes the very last thing we want to do. And yet, nothing else about life is like that. Like, if I'm really feeling the need to pamper myself, a pedicure is awesome. And there's almost no time that I'm going to turn down a pedicure. And yet we don't treat our intimacy and our marriage that way. And I almost pray that we could get to that point where we'd see it as something as welcoming and inviting and wanted and enjoyable as a pedicure or a piece of pie or a glass of wine. And you even use that analogy in your book.
Yeah, one of the things I love to do is parallel my relationship with Christ with my relationship with my husband. And I just think about the way things get in the way of our relationship with Christ. I mean, all kinds of things. It doesn't take much to throw us off of our place of regular connection with God.
Mm-hmm.
And the same is true with our relationship with our husband. Everything wants to divide marriage. Satan would love nothing more than to destroy families by dividing marriages. And so everything gets in the way. And like you said, it takes absolutely prioritizing and intentionally trying to find moments to connect.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought Christ back into this part of the conversation too, because at the end of your chapter on comfort and refreshment, you offer a really important reminder. I'm going to read it right now. It just fits perfectly with what we're talking about. Sex doesn't take the place of God, and neither does my husband. Mm-hmm. Above all else, I have to spend time getting filled up, restored, and comforted by God. But God gave me my husband, a godly man, to physically hold on to, a man who can speak words of life and truth to me. He gave us intimacy as a way to love each other and communicate things that words cannot. Finding restoration in intimacy shows me what a good God I serve.
Yeah. Amen.
And I think that that's what I relearned again this week as Larry and I reestablished intimacy in the wake of conflict, remembering this truth of what you've said here about the fact that sometimes there just aren't any words to say I'm sorry or I forgive you, like touch, physical touch, and eye-to-eye contact without necessarily any words, but just in that intimacy. And yet we move away instead of moving closer and offering each other comfort.
Yeah, I like to just slide into another part of God's design for sex, because I think by how you're talking about it, it makes me think about it. God created sex as a way to know each other. It's this Hebrew word yada, that's for knowing, and the Bible uses it in as far as our relationship with God, but also uses it in the most intimate way of knowing our husband. And I think that this is the answer to how we have physical intimacy with each other. Because I think there are a lot of couples that are not having physical intimacy in a way where they're really getting to know each other. And I think it matters.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does.
It's not just about both of you getting to the finish line, because that can feel completely empty, especially to a wife. For some reason, we are very in tune to, are we really getting to know each other? Are we connected during our time together? Or are we just touching each other in a way to create enough friction to get to the finish line? And there's a lot more to that. And so there is a real importance in learning how to connect during physical intimacy, and to slow down, to use all of our 5 senses like they do in Song of Songs, eyes, touch, all of that. In my book and in my classes, I teach this concept of feeling versus rubbing. And I think it's such an important concept. And, when you rub, it's just this mindless rubbing. And most of us, I don't know, I don't want to just be rubbed. But when you feel, it's like you're slowing down enough to actually take what you're experiencing in your fingertips, you're bringing it up in your mind and making it this mental map. And you recognize when maybe your spouse's body is enjoying something, or when it's becoming ticklish, or when it's becoming tense and it doesn't enjoy something. And you shift and you adjust. And it's this journey of discovery. You never know where you're going. But you're actually feeling each other in those moments. I think there are a lot of couples where they're not there. The husband's worried about how to make things right. The wife is, I don't know, dissecting
Worried about dinner.
Makes, or thinking about the laundry, or, there are a lot of places we can be, but we're not just there. And it's a lot like our relationship with God. I mean, I remember praying away where you can just pray away and prattle off your list to God, and not listen, but not even not listen, not just be with him sometimes. Right. And so can we connect physically in a way where sometimes it's not about the destination at all. We're just being together. One of the books that
families that are impacted by disability should know that because disability by its nature has often slowed our lives down to where, for better and for worse, we've become hyper in tune to a lot of things that the rest of the world completely misses because they're just rushing on to the next thing. But by the same token, moms especially, who tend to be the primary caregiver, have, I think, at least I relate to this, a hard time sometimes slowing down from the mental pace even of managing all the details of the day, of the constant caregiving, managing school issues, insurance issues, medical issues, bowel regimens, all these things. And to then suddenly try to shut that off when we come into the bedroom or even into a conversation with our spouse can be really hard. And in fact, one of the related obstacles that has happened in my marriage years ago, Larry and I had a conversation I'll never forget, where I was crying and he was basically begging me to allow him to see me in my weakness, where I was soft and where he could be my hero rescuer and take me in his arms. But I was constantly in this I have to be strong mode. And I didn't know how to be that. And part of me desperately craved that from him and didn't even realize to what degree that all of my demeanor and signals were so uninviting, so hard, so stiff, so self capable that everything about me said, I don't need you. I might want you sometimes, but I don't really need you. And he needed to be needed.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing how much marriage teaches us about where Christ wants us to be too? Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, I think about you explaining that story. I'm like, wow, like that's just what Jesus wants from us sometimes too, right? Mm-hmm. To not be so self-reliant, but to sometimes just take the moment and just be with him. It's not easy, and yet there's so much to learn in the marriage bed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I do think, you talked a lot about wives and our minds are busy. And I totally get that. I think husbands have their own struggles, and I'm not sure that we realize just how much anxiety and pressure and stress they carry into the marriage bed. As far as, if you listen to the culture, they would tell you that men are supposed to know exactly what's supposed to work for us and how to make things magical for us. And yet a lot of times they're lost, and a lot of times they're so busy thinking about what they're supposed to be doing that they're not even there. And then we pick up on that and we sense that, and we're like, I'm not interested in this. And we start thinking that we don't like physical connection, but I think a lot of times we just don't like the ways that we're having physical connection. And then you couple that with, how many women don't really understand how their bodies work, that our bodies are so different from men. And if we're not really educated about how our bodies work, I mean, I've had women that have gone in class, 30 years into marriage, and they're just figuring out that what they thought was supposed to just naturally happen doesn't just naturally happen for most women.
Or even for those who thought they had it figured out 30 years in, you'll learn some new things, and it's even better. I've been married 32 years, I promise you. And there were a number of years where I really wasn't sure there would be any romance again in my marriage. So, and that's a story that I gladly share, but it's not for today. Our time is already running short. I'm so glad we get to come back a second time. Before we get too far into wrap-up mode, I did promise some statistics. So if I could take a moment, statistics on special needs families are an interesting thing. In fact, I'll try to add some links in the show notes for this to some other statistics, but I'm just going to quickly try to share a couple of thoughts on this. First of all, I think it's important for special needs families, special needs couples, to know that divorce rates are often misquoted, very often misquoted, or they're at least misleading, okay? There are, for example, we hear all the time, 80%, 85% divorce rate is frequently quoted, but the reality is not much research actually does exist, and there's very little information about the impact of disability on marriage status or satisfaction. So there are a number of specific studies out there, and I can link you to blog articles and so forth in the show notes, but it's important to know a couple of facts here. First, couples are definitely vulnerable, but statistics show some helpful things. First of all, divorce rates among couples with children who have Down syndrome is actually lower when compared to couples with a child who have other special needs. Divorce rates among couples with children who have autism spectrum disorders actually begins to decline after the child is older than 8. So if you can stick it out through part of those early elementary years, you have a statistically much better chance of surviving. Parents of children with psychiatric disorders, which is more stigmatizing, and other special needs like that, appear to have fewer supports and connections to the community that can help them preserve their marriages. And the risk factors for divorce among special needs parents include low birth weight. Okay, these are the risk factors. Low birth weight, parents unable to complete a high school education, fathers with less education than mothers, living in rural areas, disconnection from friends, neighbors, and churches. Hold that thought, because this related to a lot of this is education and connection to others. In the church, the divorce rate among church attenders is dramatically lower than it is for those outside the church, according to one source, The Good News About Marriage by Feldhahn. Several studies have found the rate of divorce among church attenders falls by roughly 25 to 50%. And here's my personal note on all this. Even if the statistics we hear are true, and 20 or 15 or 20% of our marriages only are going to survive a special needs experience, why not pray proactively about it and trust the Lord that we're going to be part of the 15%, or that He's going to help us grow that percentage? Why are we claiming fatalistically that, and assuming or giving ourselves permission even when we hit those really bumpy spots to be part of a statistic? Why would we do that? If it was our child and the doctor said your child has only 15 or 20% chance of surviving this condition he was born with, we would not be saying, "Oh no, I'm done, I give up," every time it got hard. We would fight. I think that's part of what our battle is, even in our marriages, is that we allow disability to consume who we are and our identity as a family, our identity as a person. I suddenly put on a hat of special needs mom, and it suddenly becomes all of who I am, to where all those other roles I play lose their opportunities. We had friends tell us years ago they'd lost a child very suddenly to a brain aneurysm when she was just shy of 5 years old. And when Carly was just diagnosed, they came to us and basically said, you know, you're going to get a lot of statistics quoted to you and a lot of people telling you your marriage is very vulnerable and you may be very fearful. But we want to assure you that this is survivable and that you have people around you to support you. And even if we don't talk a lot about this with you much over the coming years, we want you to know that from this day forward, we're going to be praying for your marriage, because ours has been prayed over and we want yours to be prayed over. And we believe that will be the key. And we think that you should go to others and ask them to be intentional about praying for your marriage, because you'll need it to be covered. There are going to be a lot of attacks on your marriage. And they were really right. That conversation happened about 20 years ago. And we see them only a couple of times a year, but I always know they're praying. I can exchange a text message now and then, either initiated by me or by her, where she reassures me that they're praying for us. And knowing that, and knowing that my parents have prayed for us for years and years, my sister and her husband pray for us, people praying for us, often people we don't even know are praying for us. But knowing they're out there makes so much difference even in my mindset, in making a decision that we are going to be in the positive side of these statistics, and I am going to fight for my marriage at least as hard as I fight for an IEP or a medical procedure I think Carly needs, because I believe my marriage is that important. In fact, in many cases, I personally believe it's more important to God and to our family that our marriage stays strong than just almost any procedure, short of a life-saving procedure that Carly could receive. Or any therapy for that matter. So I've learned to be really on guard for allowing a fight over an IEP or something like that to consume our family situation so much that it steals the joy out of my marriage. And my kids have needed to grow up seeing the security. In fact, statistics on siblings say that siblings want more than anything to know that their family is secure. They can handle the disability, they can handle the challenges, but they need reassurance growing up that their family is secure. So I hate that we have to end, but we do have to wrap up there, Ruth. And so can you tell us where to find you? And we'll be back again in a month. So we'll give you that. But tell us where people can find you and your book.
Sure. My book's available on Amazon. My blog is www.awaken-love.net. And there's a lot of resources you can find there as far as things to read, but there are also video classes available that you can take on your own or you can take in a group.
And we've talked about the possibility of doing a group specifically for women or men or couples. We could do a Zoom thing and then split up with the men and the women having a small Zoom room or something. So let us know in the comments or email me at info@walkrightin.org or email Ruth and let her know if you'd have interest in something like that. Because even if we got like a dozen people together to do something like that, we're really willing to do that. And we can talk more about that when we're together again for the October 15th episode of Real Talk Livestream at noon. So we hope you'll join us back then. We're going to talk some more. And I also am going to list a couple of other resources in the show notes, just so you know. Johnny and Ken and Their Untold Love Story is a great book too. Just that one would be more about a marriage where actually one of the people in the marriage is impacted by disability, because of course Johnny is a quadriplegic. But there's a lot more to it than that. Depression, chronic pain, just emotional connection, the caregiving responsibilities that a lot of people who are parenting a child with special needs would relate to in their book too. And Joe and Cindy Farini's book, Love Always, is also a wonderful book for couples with a lot of practical things that you can do to nurture your marriage. So thank you so much, Ruth, for being here today. I didn't see anybody posting questions yet, so I don't know if that's because they were waiting for us to pause. But if you've got questions, people who are watching, I see Judy's there too, please just post questions or email them to Ruth or I, and we can talk some more about those things when we come up at our next episode. So we'll call it done for today. Any final thoughts, Ruth?
No, I'm just looking forward to our next conversation. This has been super fun.
Great.
Thank
For
you
me
for
too.
having me.
You're welcome. All right, everybody. Have a great day. May God bless your marriages, and we'll see you again, hopefully, on the next round. Bye for now. All right. I got to figure out how to turn it off. I guess I'm going to end it altogether.